Heavenly Father, in your word, you have given us a vision of that holy city to which the nations of the world bring their glory. Behold and visit, we pray, the cities of the earth, especially the city of Memphis and the city of Paris. Renew the ties of mutual regard which form our civic life. Send us honest and able leaders. Enable us to eliminate poverty, prejudice, and oppression, that peace may prevail with righteousness and justice with order, and that men and women and children from different cultures and with differing talents may find with one another the fulfillment of their humanity. Through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen. I chose that prayer because our guest this morning has many interests and is published in many different areas, including urban planning and development of cities. So don't let it ever be said that theologians or preachers are only interested in God alone. Dr. Fout comes to us from Bexley-Seabury, one of the Episcopal seminaries. He has a PhD from the University of Durham, I believe. Cambridge, sorry. He is published in many different areas and has just this year published his masterpiece, which is called Fully Alive, the Glory of God and the Human Creature in Karl Barth, von Balthasar, and Theological Exegesis of Scripture. Daunting title. An incredible title.
Pick your copy up at the airport on the way to the beach.
He is not here, however, to talk about his book. He's here because I heard Dr. Fout about a year ago at a conference of parishes that gathered together, and he did a presentation on the Diocese of London, where he has done a lot of research about London's success as a diocese over the last 10 or 15 years in terms of planting new churches, revitalizing older traditional parishes, and above all, making it a centerpiece of their mission to grow, not only spiritually, but numerically. And by the grace of God and a lot of creativity, it has actually happened. And that success story, I think, offers us a nice compare and contrast with some of the things we're doing here. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Fout to Grace St. Luke's and the Rector.
Thank you very much for that welcome, Richard. It's a great pleasure to be here. I was so pleased to meet Richard last February. We've had some great conversations in the meantime, and when I got the invitation to come here, I couldn't possibly have said no. So it's just lovely to be here. Now, I don't know, you might guess from my regional accent that I'm not from the South, so maybe in the South you don't tweet in church, I don't know, but if you do, there are the relevant, hashtags or whatever they call them. They tell me that I really ought to do these things, so I'm fumbling my way forward. If you wanted to tweet about what you were hearing today or what we were doing or whatever, there's what you'll need for that. So, London, I'd like to reflect on the growth of the church in London a bit this morning. I'd like to tell you some stories and look at some of the sort of ways of thinking that have emerged from London about the church, what it can do, how it can engage its mission and ministry. I've been looking at it now myself for about 3 years in the Diocese of London, and some very exciting things are going on there. Exciting in particular because we all know that in America we're seeing some changes when it comes to church attendance, not least, of course, in the Episcopal Church. Some people have tried to explain this decline, for example, by saying that America is increasingly diverse and pluralistic and multi-faith, or that America is increasingly urban, secular, and post-Christian. And indeed, fewer people are identifying themselves as Christians of any sort, but are actually fairly more likely these days to describe themselves as spiritual but not religious, or even as having no faith at all. They would sort of tick none on a box in a survey form. And in fact, they're coming to be known as the nuns, which I never find is the most helpful way of talking about it, because it sounds like, they're wearing habits and, praying the rosary or something. They're actually not doing that at all. So, but if these reasons then for the church's decline in America, if these hold any water, it would seem that decline in the church, and especially among Anglicans, is inevitable for any similar demographic group, sort of anywhere in the world. And in fact, that's often the case. but I've found there's one notable exception, and that's the Diocese of London, England. It's very interesting because London could easily make a case for being the most diverse, pluralistic, multi-faith, urban, secular, post-Christian city in the West. In England generally, and London in particular, fewer people identify themselves as Christian than in America, and attendance at worship services is just a tiny fraction of the overall population. And yet, the Diocese of London has experienced steady and marked growth since the early 1990s. How much growth? Well, in 1993, they had around 48,000 people on the membership rolls. By 2010, they had grown to over 74,000. So that's a growth of 54% in 17 years. Now, that's not a modern-day Pentecost, but the numbers really are striking, especially when you consider that we in the Episcopal Church have lost somewhere around 24% over the last decade. Something's going right, so what can we learn? Now, alongside that growth in membership, growth in terms of giving and Sunday attendance have also been substantial in London as well. Giving, for example, is up 50% since the turn of the millennium. So I'd like to share with you then some observations about London and its growth, and I'm going to start then by talking about the diocesan vision statement. The diocese is a part of sort of understanding the growth in general. But then we'll also look at some ways that the churches are lowering thresholds in order to allow more people to come in, to be more accessible to people. And then we'll also look at the way in which churches are crossing over thresholds to go out into the world to serve and bless people there. And then finally we'll spend just a few moments looking at some principles that seem to be in common across growing and healthy churches. Just as an opportunity to sort of bring together the things we'll be looking at and give you some fodder for reflection as well. So, the Diocese of London has put together what it's calling Capital Vision 2020. It's a 7-year, it's a vision statement for the next 7 years of the life of the diocese. So this is their strapline. They want to be more confident, more compassionate, and more creative. I'll say a little bit more about those three terms in a moment, but first we have a quick video to just sort of introduce you to the program in general. And here we go.
Many people are going home somewhere else and
They never meet another Christian unless
They meet them in London.
something is happening in London.
It's about acknowledging what the church is doing at the moment and the potential that is all
It's not about being
there.
optimistic about things that might happen in the future.
I think it's about being optimistic about now.
The volunteers do a brilliant. And I thought, well, why are you doing this? You should be able to enjoy yourselves now. But you're willing to sit next to them, you know what I mean?
It's fantastic that the church is finally embracing the creative arts, theatre, culture.
Church in London has been growing massively over the last few years.
I've never seen such a young population of church, but it really feels like it's growing so passionate as well.
Feels just like everything is going on in London and we're really kind of at the centre of something.
Thank you. There are a lot of things we could just point out in that video, but I think one in particular I'd like to point out is that it really is focused on people rather than structures. The bishop and St. Paul's Cathedral function as symbols for the overall diocese, but throughout it you see many different people and you hear many different voices, and I think that that's actually important for understanding what's going on in London. But to go back more broadly to their mission statement, they put together these 7-year mission statements. This is the third such mission statement called Capital Vision 2020. Now, the mission statement in general is, we share a vision of a church for London that is Christ-centered and outward-looking. We seek to be more confident in speaking and living the gospel of Jesus Christ, more compassionate in serving communities with the love of God the Father, and more creative in reaching new people and places in the power of the Spirit. So it's sort of Trinitarian there. But the interesting thing then is that they take each of these categories then and break them down in terms of different specific goals for each of those areas. And so to enable this being more confident, they will communicate the gospel more effectively, including new media. They will, I love this, equip and commission 100,000 ambassadors representing Jesus Christ in daily life. They will invest in leadership and increase the number of ordinands by 50%. So I'd just like to point out briefly, we'll take a moment to look at the other goals under the other two areas, but they have done a fairly good job of having SMART goals. SMART is an acronym for specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. And so, for example, to equip and commission 100,000 ambassadors representing Jesus Christ in daily life, that's specific and measurable. I mean, you know, if you do only 90,000 or if you do 0, you know that you haven't gotten to your goal. If you do 120,000, you know you've exceeded your goal. There's nothing sort of airy-fairy or pie in the sky about this. It's a very specific sort of a goal. It's also a very daring goal, especially when you realize that there are only 70-some thousand baptized members of the Diocese of London. So they've also then tied themselves somehow to either growing or working ecumenically with other Christians, or who knows how. But they've staked themselves to a goal, which means that they need to go out beyond just business as usual and what they're used to. So there are other goals we can look at. Being more compassionate in serving communities with the love of God the Father, and that includes new initiatives to fight poverty, inequality, injustice. Opening up church buildings to the wider community, keeping them open during the day, for example, to strengthen links between schools and their local community. We can also look at being more creative in reaching new people and places with the good news and the power of the Spirit. They're going to double the number of young people involved in local Christian community. They'll create or renew 100 worshiping communities. They'll engage more closely with sport, the creative arts, and each pray for at least 7 people, 7 years, that we may share with them the story of our faith. Now, I'd especially like to point out this create or renew 100 worshiping communities. This is, in Jim Collins' terms, what we might call a big, hairy, audacious goal. How on earth will you do that? When you stop and do the math, 7 years, there are only 84 months. So clearly they've committed themselves to planting, renewing, rejuvenating more than one such community per month. That's pretty audacious. Now, I've talked with Rick Thorpe, the new bishop for church plants, and he's explained it to me, and he actually has it all worked out, how this is very much happening already, and it's happening all sorts of different ways. But it's still a very inspiring goal. When I think about the dioceses, our diocese is an Episcopal Church. I'm in Southern Ohio. I'm from the Diocese of Chicago. I am canonically resident in Western Michigan. None of them have articulated this kind of really daring and specific goal when it comes to rejuvenating worshiping communities. We'll also point out, I'll also point out, though, that the goals are also very flexible. So in other words, they're audacious, but they're also flexible and adaptable to individual communities. They're specific and measurable, but they don't live and die by numbers. For example, the challenge of equipping and commissioning ambassadors of Jesus Christ in everyday life, that's a big goal, but they don't spell out exactly what that means. They don't commit themselves to only one program of equipping. In order to be an ambassador, you must go through this program. You must do it this way. They don't describe in detail who this is going to be or what they will do. They do have commissioning services all around the diocese for this sort of committal or recommittal, but each church takes up this challenge in their own way. And so as much as sort of firm marching orders from the diocese, it is actually intended, I think, to prick our imaginations and to get us to think more broadly and to live into the challenge that the diocese and, I believe, God is calling us to. Now, the approach to creating the vision statement was actually to be open and consultative with the churches, with as many as possible. And the bishop asked a number of questions for every church to discuss in small groups. And in all, around 2,000 people were involved in discussing and responding to the three questions that the bishop put out. So it was a very broad-based and consultative process. That means then that this vision statement actually welled up from the bottom, rather than being sort of designed in some sort of a conference room and then imposed from the top down. This actually means that there's a great deal of life reflected in the vision statement, a great deal of the life of the diocese that's actually going on at this time. Now, I've been talking a lot about the diocesan vision statement, partly because I think it's very much a part of the growth, but also simply because I think that they've done it very well. Now, obviously, you're a parish and not a diocese, but I think that as you yourselves prayerfully consider what God is calling you to and what the next stages of your own mission and ministry are here, this sort of process can be very helpful for you as you think about who are we, what are we being called to do, what is the Holy Spirit saying to us in the life of Memphis. So, okay, so much for the diocese for now. We can also talk then about lowering thresholds. The churches in London have worked very hard to lower thresholds for belonging, lowering thresholds to bring people in, to attract people to what's going on in the church. One form of this is in the Alpha course. There are all sorts of other attractional ministries, and so this is not simply about Alpha. But Alpha has borne an amazing amount of fruit in London. At any given time, for example, around 1,500 people are involved in the Alpha course, a course that's intended to investigate the Christian message in a basic and introductory way. Around 1,500 people are involved in this at one church site in particular, Holy Trinity Brompton, which sort of specializes in this. This is also used, though, in other churches around the diocese as a way to reach out to connect with people around the church. The format of Alpha is this. You start with dinner, so you're already offering hospitality and blessing to whoever comes in. Practically speaking, people in London are busy too, and so if you're starting a program at 6:30 or 7, people are very often coming straight from work, and so it's also a very practical consideration. So you have dinner, usually in small groups. You get to socialize, you get to be known and to know other people. And then after that, there's some worship with some music. There's a presentation, a large group presentation, sometimes live, sometimes it's canned with a video or something. And then there's a time of open questions. They move from the large group setting to a small group setting where you have 7, 8, 9 people together along with a leader. And they're able to, the participants are able to ask any kind of question at all that might occur to them. They can challenge what they've heard, they can ask questions, they can raise the kind of questions that have been bothering them all their lives, they can push back against what they've heard, that's just wrong, I don't understand it. They can interact with the material however they want to. It's an opportunity for them to really engage and explore, and they're completely free to do that. And then the small group time ends with a question about whether there are any prayer requests, and then the people pray for each other. Now, leaders for these groups are chosen on the basis of whether you would be comfortable bringing your unchurched friend to them. I mean, so the entire focus then is on blessing and meeting unchurched people, people who wouldn't even cross over the threshold of a church usually, and to do so with a maximum of care and love. And so, if someone's really sort of tied in and dogmatic and can't process people's own processing of a message, or can't deal with people asking particular and pointed questions, they're not going to be very good as a leader for these sorts of groups. Now, the Alpha Course has grown all around the world since 1993. It has grown into having programs in 169 different countries, and 24 million people have gone through it since that time. So it's really reaching a lot of people, making a lot of connections. But again, as I said, Alpha is not the only program along these lines, and certainly not the only program that's bearing fruit. There are also other programs like Christianity Explored, or the Emmaus Course, Camino, the Pilgrim Course. But the idea behind all of these is that there's just this keen sense that Christian faith is not given or obvious. It's not straightforward. It's not well known. In London, they really understand that you can't just assume that everyone knows what the Christian message is about and you'll come over the threshold of the church, obviously. That's just not the case. So rather than leave it to others, the church then has seen this as one way to say what they're about, as well as to present the gospel and to do some gentle evangelism. There are similar programs, too, that aren't introductions to Christianity, and these include courses on becoming parents, a new course called the Money Course, which is about financial management, debt relief, that sort of thing. There are parents and toddlers groups, really important at helping very often moms or carers for children to give them a chance to socialize, give children a chance to play with other kids. There are job skills courses, and the idea here is that usually young adults without a university degree will come along, and there's some training in marketable job skills, and then an effort to connect them with the sorts of jobs that they're training for at the end of that. And there are also support groups and AA and all sorts of things like that. But the idea behind all of them, each of these programs, is that they bless people, they make connections, and they bring people in over the threshold. People who might not otherwise even have darkened the door of a church. One person I spoke to whose church really sort of specializes in this said, I mean, it's all about blessing people, bringing them in, giving them a blessing, giving them something new, something life-giving for their life. And then they come into the church, and the church building is not this kind of forbidding, closed, private space. But they come in and they can look around and say, oh, that's what this is, and what are those people doing over there? And these people I met aren't so bad. And so it's a way just of making a connection then between the church and the world as well. So these sorts of courses have been one way in which there's been a kind of attractional ministry to grow, but there are others as well, and they include, well, let's see. I got these out of order. They include things like great sacred music. Now, I'm sure probably most of us have heard of the St. Martin in the Fields. We might know the Academy of St. Martin in the Fields. They're really well known for a great music program, and in fact that attracts people from around London and around the world who come there as tourists into the church. And Sam Wells is the vicar there, and when he got there, he said that during the week, on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday, they had lunchtime concerts, just classical music concerts, and the place was packed to the rafters. But on Thursday, they had a Eucharist, and they routinely get 10 people, maybe 12 people on a good day. And so he tried one thing, and then he tried another, and the Eucharistic service just wasn't working for the kind of opportunity he had. So instead he rethought. He said, well, what is working here? What is working is the music. And so the music attracts people in. So what he did then is he said, well, we'll put together a program for Thursdays that we'll call Great Sacred Music. It's a 35-minute lunchtime concert, and it speaks, he says, to heart, head, and soul. Now the idea here is that he and the musicians come up with pieces of classical music that can focus on, thematically, on maybe a season, so it'll be on the Lenten season, on a doctrine, say the resurrection of Jesus, or on the time of Easter. It can focus on the Trinity, or Christian perspectives on suffering, that sort of thing. And so what he does then is he comes in as the vicar of the parish, and he introduces the music. And so that people can get sort of maximal understanding and understand the context of each piece of music, he'll offer a brief introduction to each piece of music so that people can understand it. And again, he started packing them in from all around London and all around the world. The tourists who come there to Trafalgar Square, they come in on Thursdays so that he can explain to them the basics of the Christian faith interspersed with music. It's absolutely brilliant. And then we can also talk then about, let's see, I need to go back here, about Bethlehem Unwrapped. This is at St. James Piccadilly, which, if you know London, is just down a little bit from St. Martin in the Fields. Fabulously creative. We actually have a video here which will show you a little bit of what this program was about. So why don't we have that?
Hello, welcome to Bethlehem Unwrapped. I'm Justin Butcher, I'm the director of the Bethlehem Unwrapped Festival, and here we are at the wall, St. James's Church, Piccadilly in central London, and we've spent 8 months planning to build this replica of the separation wall in Palestine, and 8 days building it, and it's taken a lot of scaffolding and a lot of hard work by a huge team of builders, designers, architects, scaffolders, and today it's gone up and we've done it. This is a festival of hope, reaching out to the people of Bethlehem behind the wall, and celebrating the incredible hope and peace and joy and life of those people. We're unwrapping the traditional Victorian sentimental images of Christmas and showing this is what Bethlehem today looks like. An 8-metre high concrete separation wall surrounding it. People are sending their messages of solidarity to the people of Bethlehem by doing their own graffitis on the wall, making their marks.
My name is Lucy Winkett. I'm the Rector of St James's Piccadilly here in central London. This Christmas we have built a huge wall across the front of our church. We'd really like you to come and see it because it's what the people of Bethlehem are experiencing today.
We have an incredible programme beginning on the 29th with slam poetry, Rafif Ziad, Harry Baker, Disraeli and others, and the next night we have a stand-up comedy night, Stand Up Against the Wall, headlined with Jeremy Hardy and Mark Steele. On the 2nd we're showing a wonderful film, Jeremy Hardy versus the Israeli army. Then on the 3rd we have our Bethlehem feast. Yotam Ottolenghi and Sami Tamimi, masters of Middle Eastern cuisine. And then the 4th we have a panel discussion. And on the 5th our final night concert with singers from the Tallis Scholars, Reem Kalani and Nigel Kennedy. So come down to St James's and make your mark on the wall. Send a message to the people of Bethlehem this Christmas.
Thank you. So St James's Piccadilly, this London city centre church, has always been well known for its music and its art and its social engagement. And they have this area in front of their church, which is a nice open space for central London. And typically, as you can see here, they have the Piccadilly Market there. And then around Christmas time, they usually have the Piccadilly Christmas Market. Again, it draws all sorts of people in, both locals and tourists. But a couple of years ago, they decided instead, on the basis of having gone to Bethlehem and visiting the real Bethlehem where Jesus was born, on the basis of that experience, they said, we need to do something different for Christmas this year. And so they came up with the Bethlehem Unwrapped Festival. It allowed them to bring together a collaboration of Palestinian, Israeli, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, and secular organizations and artists and contributors who were able to come together to create this 2-week festival, offering up a vision of cultural diversity and cooperation in the cause of a just peace. And as you heard, people were able to interact with the wall, to graffiti on it. There was an art exhibition inside the church of children's art from Bethlehem, and it was entitled, All They Draw is the Wall. There were high-profile events associated with the installation, a film, a poetry slam, an evening of comedy, music and dance, and a culinary event featuring the chefs Yotam Ottolenghi and Sami Tamimi from Israel and Palestinian lands, respectively, coming together to cook a feast for the people who would come. The event was widely featured in news media. It was written up in at least 71 publications around the world, and it helped to dramatize the conditions of contemporary Bethlehem and the Palestinian people generally. They undertook it with a great deal of care, though, and a lot of planning, so as not to suggest that, for example, the Israelis shouldn't protect themselves, or to suggest that there was only one side of the wall, as it were. They worked well in advance with Jewish and Palestinian groups both to let them know what was going to happen and to work together to express it well. And actually, in the event, around 2,000 visitors came each day during the 2 weeks that the wall was up. I mean, that's an incredible, strong, attractional sort of ministry with this art exhibit. And at the same time, the wall is a potent image just in its own right, apart from Bethlehem. It's also a symbol of the many walls that we erect, historically and metaphorically. As a church, it gives us a chance not only to present the very real, live conditions of Bethlehem, where Jesus was born, but also to talk about the one who has broken down the dividing wall of hostility. So, okay, these then are some examples then of the way that the church in London has lowered thresholds in order to attract people, in order to make the church a place seen as one of blessing, a place that's known, a place that's warm, welcoming, friendly, connecting with people. But the church in London has also worked to cross thresholds as well. And there are all sorts of examples of this that we could talk about. I'll just talk about two in particular today. But they cross thresholds. They go out over the threshold of the church, out into the world to serve and bless the people there. And part of this is in the form of pioneer ministry and fresh expressions of church. There is a new imagination about the church that's percolating up, and it's seen then in starting new and often unconventional expressions of the church, according to the needs and opportunities that particular areas or groups of people present to them. And this is actually really important. In the UK, it's estimated that upwards of 60% of the population would never be reached by existing churches, and therefore work like fresh expressions of church in pioneer ministry are simply seen as good stewardship. Now, Archbishop Rowan Williams, former Archbishop Rowan Williams, talked very plainly about fresh expressions. He was a real encourager of it and said that we need to understand this as a kind of mixed economy. That is to say, fresh expressions of church and traditional church are not in competition with each other. One is not replacing the other, but rather they're meant to work symbiotically. They're meant to work to be complementary to one another. And each has gifts that the other need. And so it's not at all a matter of replacing one with the other. So one example here of a really interesting fresh expression of church is St. Luke's in the High Street. And we have a slightly longer video to watch about this. Richard, do we go till 25 past or 20 past? About 20 past. Okay, well, we'll give the video a miss this morning. That's fine. It's available online. You can go on YouTube and search for St. Luke's in the High Street. The story of St. Luke's in the High Street is this. They're in Walthamstow, a community in northeastern London. They were in an older building. The church had been losing members. The older building was tucked back, though, in a residential neighborhood. So there was, no sort of connection with the larger community, only with that immediate neighborhood. And they got to a point where they realized they were being called to something a little bit different. Instead of propping up the institution that they had, God was calling them to do something a little bit different. And so they decided that actually where they were being called to be was to be out on the high street, the British expression, the main street, basically, where all of the commerce and so forth takes place, where people of high and low status are available to be met where they're at. And so they sold the church building, and now they meet in each other's homes during the week. They have a Bible study. They have equivalent to a vestry. They call it a time team. They meet monthly for supper in someone's home. But then on Sundays, they host the local farmers market in Walthamstow, which is down on the high street. And so they're there. They coordinate all the vendors and everything. But they're also pastoral presence for the vendors. They themselves have a marquee, a gazebo there, where they pass out hot drinks and cakes and so forth, and offer conversation to anyone, whether a stall holder or a shopper or whoever. They'll pray with people if they'd like prayer. But then in addition, they offer a free breakfast and Bible study in a local cafe each Sunday for everyone who would like to come. And that was begun because they noticed that there were a number of people some of whom were homeless, who were kind of on the margins, who would come and help set up, but then say they might be hungry. And so they accepted that offer and said, well, let's go down and have some breakfast, and we'll have a simple Bible study, and we'll have that chance to get to know each other as well. So they're doing all these sorts of things. You can see here then, this is the Pop-In Cafe where they meet for breakfast. This is a picture. I was there for breakfast with them once. And then these are some pictures from the farmers market. It's really something. Another example of a fresh expression of church is found in the Deeper Lounge. This is another place in northeast London, actually in the Diocese of Cheltenham rather than London. It's a ministry of the Deeper Network Church, which has evolved into a fresh expression of church. Basically, the church realized that community was an incredible source of attraction for people around London over the weekends, because there are a good number of pubs and clubs, nightclubs, dance clubs in the area. And so they realized that about 10 to 12,000 young people and young adults would be coming into this area every Friday evening and every Saturday evening, and that those were people who probably had no connection with the church, and the church needed to make an effort to meet, to connect with, to bless. And so on Friday nights, they go out and set up a gazebo just near the pub and club area, and they serve refreshments from 10 at night till 2 on Saturday morning. They have some street pastors, people who are trained in counseling and praying with people and pastoral ministry who will be there. But it's all actually just about blessing people, giving out refreshments, having a chat, seeing where they're at, seeing what sort of conversation they'd like to have, what's going on with their lives. It's been a way of being present with a group of people that the church would never have any connection with at all otherwise. And it's borne some fruit, actually. They've moved from having a marquee to they actually have a storefront now, and they run programs on other nights of the week as well. It's grown into a fresh expression of church rather than just an outreach ministry of the deeper network church. We could also look, though, at more traditional churches in the way that they're crossing thresholds as well. St. John at Hackney is a good example of this. In 2007, they had a parish-wide listening and visioning process. They wanted to figure out what was God calling them to, what did they need to do, what was the next step. And so as a result of that, because they're in the middle of a neighborhood with very little green space, they decided that they needed to do a comprehensive redevelopment of the churchyard, the graveyard. And in doing so, they removed the headstones, they opened up the churchyard to the community, and now it has a community garden, a children's play area, a refreshment stand, a farmer's market, and a lot of open green space that the people of the neighborhood can use. Now, at the same time, they also decided to open the church building itself to host creative or nonprofit enterprises. And in fact, there are a fair number of concerts that are unrelated to the church which will use that space. Also, Father Rob Wickham, until recently the rector there at St. John at Hackney, and the congregation have both been really active in the local community. And so then in 2011, you might recall there were riots in London. In 2011, when the riots began, Rob put on his collar and a cassock, and just when things were kind of going haywire, he went out into the streets in order to be present with the people there, to serve as an intermediary between the protesters and the police. And then, that wasn't all. The morning after, when the high street near his church had been looted and vandalized, he spearheaded a community cleanup in which people came from around the neighborhood to come out and reclaim their area by helping to clean it up. And he also provided times for moments of silence, for prayer, for focus, he was inviting people also to forgive those who had inflicted that kind of chaos in the neighborhood. And a few days later then, he also helped to organize a neighborhood tea party. They closed down the street, the very street that had been the source of such chaos and destruction. They closed it down. They had a party with tea, juice, cakes, music, and games. This here is a picture of the tea party. And actually down there on the left is a representative picture, actually, from near the church with the rioting in 2011. So the Tea Party was all a way of helping people in the neighborhood to come out and reclaim their streets as their own, as a safe space. It also gave them a chance then to get to know each other, to meet each other face to face, to not feel scared or threatened by your neighbors. And amidst all of this service to the community, in about 6 years, average Sunday attendance at St. John at Hackney has more than doubled, growing from around 76 to 180. We could also look then at St. Anne's in Tottenham, another church that I think is bringing together both this lowering thresholds and crossing over thresholds. Now, St. Anne's is in Tottenham, a neighborhood which is not far from Hackney, the neighborhood we were just talking about, and actually where the riots began, as I'll mention in a moment. The Tottenham area, though, actually has the highest unemployment rate in all of London, and also one of the highest rates of poverty in the whole of the United Kingdom. The area around the church is known as the most ethnically diverse in all of Europe, with around 300 different languages being spoken. Tottenham has known its share of civil strife, in part growing out of the tense relationship between the largely black residents of the neighborhood and the largely white police force in the area. And so, for example, in 1985, there was a riot on the Broadwater Farm estate in response to the death of one of its residents who had heart failure during a police search of her home. And then again in 2011, as I've already mentioned, there was a riot that began in Tottenham when a resident of the area was shot and killed by a police officer. 2 days following that killing, a peaceful protest march was followed then by 5 days of looting and arson in Tottenham and all across London. These 2011 riots began about 800 yards from the front door of St. Anne's Church. Now, John Wood is the vicar there. When he arrived at St. Anne's to serve as vicar in 1994, some time before these most recent riots, attendance hovered right around 80 or so people. Now that doubled in the first year, and that doubled despite the fact that John suffered from depression when he started his new position, and he neither preached nor led worship services during that whole time. Richard, perhaps that might be a church growth strategy you can embrace here. No preaching, no leading worship, see it grow. But John explains that all he did, in fact, with his depression, all he could do during that time was just to smile at people and make them cups of tea. But more than that, though, it was an opportunity for an entire team of people to come together and ensure that the church carried out its mission. And so then, crack on to 2010, average Sunday attendance had grown from the 80 when he started to around 410. This team approach to the church's work has endured, and St. Anne's is now served actually by a huge team of lay people and clergy, youth workers, and other people involved in the community. The staff has grown to 40. The budget of St. Anne's, including social action projects, has increased from £30,000 a year to over £600,000. The buildings, when John arrived, were mostly derelict and falling apart. They've been completely rehabilitated and are now being fully used, and they've started in the process 5 new congregations, including this one here, Church on the Farm, which is a separate church which is on the Broadwater Farm estate, where that riot started in 1985. Through it all, St. Anne's forges partnerships with local schools, the local police station, and any others serving the community. Along with the new congregations, the facilities development, deployment of lay ministries, and community connections, St. Anne's has been particularly intentional about developing leaders who are indigenous to the local community and who also mirror the mix of cultures and ethnicities there. That has been absolutely crucial. Rather than bringing in specialists and experts from outside, it's been all about empowering leadership and ministry from within. So, we've been looking at a number of stories, both of how the church in London has lowered thresholds to attract people in, as well as stories about how the church itself has gone out over thresholds to be present with people, to bless them and serve them out in the world. People have been reflecting on this some, and Robert Warren has done some quantitative surveys of churches that are lively, growing, and focused on mission. I warmly recommend his book, The Healthy Church's Handbook, which doesn't focus only on London. It's not just a London thing. He takes churches from throughout the Church of England. But I think because it's quantitative, that there's a lot of broad application to our context as well. So he comes up with 7 marks of a healthy church. I'm just going to focus on 3 briefly this morning, and then just mention the other 4 by way of passing. He found that healthy churches have 7 marks across the different kinds of churches and the kind of growth that they're experiencing. The first is that they're energized by faith rather than being motivated by maintenance or survival. This is absolutely foundational. At the heart of healthy churches, this is at the heart of healthy churches, and their members seem to have a keen awareness of the presence, goodness, love, and call of God. I feel like this characterizes all the places that I've mentioned this morning, but maybe especially the Deeper Network Lounge might be a good example of that. The entire work is a new ministry from a sustainable church model. I mean, Deeper Network Church could have just kind of toddled on its own. It was entirely sustainable. It was in a different part of that borough, but they had a keen sense of call by God to do something new and to connect with people they would not otherwise meet. A second mark of a healthy church is that it has an outward-looking focus. So in other words, the faith is about the whole of life. Ministry is about the whole of life rather than just church life. They don't have a concentration on their own life. They're concerned about the local community. and they have become good at expressing a practical care for that local community's needs. Marked by a capacity, Warren says that they are marked by a capacity to enjoy life and feel the pain of the struggles in our world. Again, there are a lot of good examples about this, but I would cite Alpha. In particular, so much of their service is actually tailored to be accessible by people who would have no other association with the church. In fact, in London, one of the people I've interviewed said that the church is often in a rather absurd place because we expect newcomers to be cross-cultural missionaries, coming into our churches, learning whole new languages, learning whole new cultures, when in fact we, the church, are the ones who are being sent out to be those cross-cultural missionaries. I think we could cite St. James Piccadilly and St. Martin in the Fields also as good examples of this. A third mark of a healthy church is that it seeks to find out what God wants. So what is God calling us to? What is God calling you to? Rather than trying to please everyone or to be everything for everyone, it's a sense of, actually we have these gifts, we have this call, these are the needs around us, this is what we're going to do. And that then becomes a sense of divine vocation, rather than just repeating past patterns and assumptions. There's a sense in these churches of focus and purpose. I think St. Luke's in the High Street's a great example of this. They were clear that their building was holding them back. But more than that, they had a clear sense that they were called to the people who were out on the street, people of high status and low status and everywhere in between. Someone who was looking for a settled liturgical service or indeed any traditional church service would be disappointed by St. Luke's in the High Street. But someone looking for surprising signs of new life amidst all the messiness of life, well, they'd be delighted. I mean, it's an amazing thing that they're doing there. Of course, this can also be a part of a ministry of a larger church. As I mentioned before, it doesn't need to be in competition. Just very briefly, 4 other marks. Healthy churches have been found to be good at facing the cost of change and growth, rather than resisting change and fearing failure. There's a willingness to make needed changes, to face the costs of making those changes. Likewise, healthy churches operate as a community, not rather than a club or an organization. They're generous and honest relationships in these churches that make the church a real functional community for everyone who participates. Each person is able to contribute. Each person's gifts are honored. Another mark of a healthy church is that it makes room for everyone. It's inclusive rather than exclusive. It's not just about our kind of people. These churches have found ways to make others feel welcome, not just at the services, but in fact in the whole life of the church. There is, at the heart of these churches, a basic kind of generosity. And then finally, a healthy church does a few things and does them well. So in other words, they're focused rather than frenetic. There's a quiet purposefulness in their life, not an anxious running around trying to do everything. And again, as I mentioned before, be everything to everyone. So through all of this, there's a focus on God, there's an engagement with others, there's a dissatisfaction with business as usual. Even if things are basically sustainable, there's a sense of wanting things to be even better, to keep going. I'm going to give you just some final observations here. First of all, it's become clear to me through my work with London that there's no one program or method that's going to solve everything. One size does not fit all. But there are better and worse ways that each church can share the gospel with those around it and do so with integrity and authenticity. Secondly, growth looks different in different places. I mean, it might look different in Memphis than it does in Columbus, than it does in London, than it does in rural Tennessee, for example. But you can still distinguish it from stagnation. Third, those places that are growing are missionally focused. They're not growing accidentally. They're very intentional about their growth, whether it's growing deeper or growing wider, connecting with more people. And they're not preoccupied with themselves. They're not paralyzed with serious internal disputes. Fourth, the missional focus of a congregation often looks actually like responsiveness as much as it does a self-directed activity. And what I mean by that is we can be tempted to come up with the answer and then just try to get people to ask the right question. But instead, it seems to me that the missional focus of the places that I've found are more about looking around, being open to what's going on, and then attempting to be with people in a way that blesses them and brings the life of God into that place. And then finally, those places that are growing are more focused on making disciples of Christ than on winning members to a church party or a denomination, or even, I would go on and add, supporting an institution for its own sake. And I'll close then just with this, this quotation from Richard Chartres, the Bishop of London. An MBA in ecclesiastical administration is no substitute for the development of a beginner's mind in acquiring the teachability with which the Spirit can work. That is to say, really this growth in the end is not about technique, it's not about program, it's about God. What is God doing? What's God calling you to do? How is God leading you? If you'd like some more information on this, I'd be very happy to hear from you after church. I lead a course called Learning from London, where we are immersed into London and learn firsthand from the sorts of people that I've been talking about. It's been amazing and energizing, and I'm delighted that it's brought me here this morning. So thank you.
I can't thank you. I can't thank you enough. I find this just incredibly inspiring. So just two quick things, and obviously we've got church, but one is there are two things I pray for as I listen to you talk that are unrelated. One is that distinction between being focused versus frenetic, huge for us. We have almost too many opportunities. So to focus on what we can do really well and not have anxiety about not getting every single thing done or pleasing every group or reaching every point of potential we have, because we can't do it all. The other thing I pray for, I wish he would be interviewed by every media outlet and newspaper in the United States when the subject of how's the church doing comes up, because this is an incredible message. It's an incredible Episcopal and Anglican message. Last, though, I'd love for you to say one word, and then we'll have a beautiful prelude from this great-looking choir that's just itching to get in here. Say a word, because when I hear you go through all these examples, what I see, there's an old Anglican definition of the word parish. It's not exactly the American definition of the word parish. Would you just say a word?
That's excellent.
We'll fit close with that.
Thank you. Absolutely. A parish in Church of England terms and historically in Episcopal terms is the area. We could also maybe call it a neighborhood. Once you get in rural areas, it's a little larger, but it's the area in which the church is situated and for which it has responsibility. And so then we'll often use the word parish as interchangeable with church. But there, parish is sort of the entire neighborhood, and that's, Christians, non-Christians, Muslims, whoever, for which the church is responsible in some sense. And I think the best way of thinking about the parish in this geographical sense is to say this is our most immediate context for mission. And so how is God calling us out to these people in this neighborhood to serve them well, to bring the gospel, to be present with them in their suffering, to carry out our mission. And so I think it's very helpful then to think about parish as geography in that sense of, well, this is our context for mission and ministry. So is that
in a year that we celebrate our anniversary and above all pray for our future, there are things we don't know about our future, of course. There are always surprises and unknowns. This of which we are certain, the future of this parish will absolutely be found in its relationship to Midtown. Amen? Thank you, Jason.
Yeah, thank you.